time, the way Americans ate was changing, again. The number of fast food franchises was exploding, as more and more overscheduled Americans began using them as a convenient way to feed themselves and their families. While the fast food revolution was sweeping the nation, the rate of cancer deaths in America was continuing to rise. As a result, in 1971, President Richard Nixon initiated a program that was dubbed the War on Cancer.
We are here today for the purpose of signing the Cancer Act of 1971. And I hope that in the years ahead, that we may look back on this day and this action as being the most significant action taken during this administration.
On the front lines of this new war was Caldwell Esselstyn. By 1978, he was chairman of the breast cancer task force at the Cleveland Clinic. Yet he soon began to doubt the medical procedures he was using.
No matter how many of these operations I was doing for women for breast cancer, I wasn't doing one single thing for the next unsuspecting victim.
So Dr. Esselstyn started investigating the global statistics on breast cancer. One of the facts he discovered was that the incidence of breast cancer in Kenya was far lower than it was in the United States. In fact, in 1978, the chances of a woman getting breast cancer in Kenya were 82 times lower than in the U.S. Dr. Esselstyn was even more surprised by the numbers he discovered for some other types of cancer.
In the entire nation of Japan in 1958, how many autopsy-proven deaths were there from cancer of the prostate? 18. 18 in the entire nation. That, to me, was about the most mind-boggling public health figure that I think I'd ever encountered.
In the same year, the U.S. population was only about twice the size of Japan's, yet the number of prostate cancer deaths exceeded 14,000. Dr. Esselstyn also discovered that in the early 1970s, the risk for heart disease in rural China was 12 times lower than it was in the U.S. And in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, heart disease was rarely encountered. The link he noted between all the areas he studied was simple.
Virtually, the Western diet was non-existent. They had no animal products. They had no dairy, no meat.
Even more compelling to Esselstyn was some historical data that had long been overlooked. In World War II, the Germans occupied Norway. Among the first things they did was confiscate all the livestock and farm animals to provide supplies for their own troops. So the Norwegians were forced to eat mainly plant-based foods.
Now we look at the deaths in Norway, just antecedent to this period, from heart attack and stroke. 1927, 1930, 35, look right up here, right at the very top, 1939. Bingo! In come the Germans. Immediately, 1940, wow, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Have we ever seen a population have their cardiovascular disease plummet like this from statins, from bypass surgery, or from stents? No. But look what immediately happened. With the cessation of hostilities in 1945, back comes the meat, back comes the dairy, back comes the strokes and heart attacks. I mean, it's such an absolute powerful lesson. But we didn't get it.
Dr. Campbell was at Cornell University, investigating what he'd discovered in the Philippines.
Our work from the beginning was designed, in a sense, to do two main things. One, I wanted to replicate, if possible, the Indian work, because it was so provocative. Secondly, if this is really true, I wanted to study how does it work.
Just like the Indian researchers, Campbell fed half the rats in his study a diet of 20% casein, the main protein in dairy products. The other half was fed only 5% casein. Over the 12 weeks of the study, the rats eating the higher protein diet had a greatly enhanced level of early liver cancer tumor growth. On the other hand, all of the rats eating only 5% protein had no evidence of cancer whatsoever. But Dr. Campbell decided to take these findings a step further. This time, instead of keeping his test rats on the same diet throughout the study, he kept them in one group and switched their diets back and forth, between 5 and 20% dairy protein, doing so at 3-week intervals. The results were astonishing. Whenever the rats were fed 20% protein, early liver tumor growth exploded. But when the same rats were given 5% protein, tumor growth actually went down.
I mean, this was so provocative, this information. We could turn on and turn off cancer growth just by adjusting the level of intake of that protein. Going from 5% to 20% is within the range of American experience. The typical studies on chemical carcinogens causing cancer are testing chemicals at levels maybe 3 or 4 orders of magnitude higher than we experience.
Even more surprisingly, Dr. Campbell discovered that a 20% diet of plant proteins from soybeans and wheat did not promote cancer.
It's virtually impossible to be protein deficient without being calorie deficient, because even if you take the foods that have the least amount of protein in it, let's say potatoes, for example, or rice, 8-9%. That's the figure we more or less need.
Dr. Campbell's research led him to a conclusion about the way genes, chemicals, and nutrition interact to promote cancer.
Cancer starts with genes. It might be genes we're born with. It might be genes that are actually changed by a chemical. So those genes become capable of producing cancer cells. Whether we do or don't get cancer is primarily related to how we promote those cancer cells to grow over time. That's where nutrition comes into play. They go much more rapidly when they were fed animal protein.
Dr. Campbell and other nutritional scientists have found that only a small percentage of cancer cases are caused solely by genes.
I think the general consensus in my field is that probably not more than 1 or 2% at most is attributed to the genes we may or may not have.
And that's the most helpful and hopeful information I